for joining. I know a lot of credit goes to Marilyn and other people from AMA to kind of set this together. I see Rebecca is also joining here, the EIC of JMR. So thank you, Rebecca, for coming. So what we wanted to do, because A, it's virtual, B, it's going to be recorded so that other people can also benefit. I had sent a very short kind of, what we had in mind for the session. I'll just quickly go over it. We have both the finalists and the finalist who won the WWO award. And so with that in mind, I thought we will take like about 10 to 15 minutes per kind of group. If they wanted to share some thoughts about kind of, what was the paper process like for them? How has it impacted their own research, perhaps? After they did that, I'm always curious. I used to read, which I think AMA has now stopped, reflections of articles from people who had won the O'Dell Award for many years. So I used to read that to kind of just understand how did they think about this idea? What happened after that, and so on. So it's in this spirit. It'll be great to have just a discussion from each one of you. And again, I'll just stop briefly. Rebecca, if you just wanted to say hi to everybody, go right ahead.
Thanks so much for being here. Really, really delightful to celebrate our award winners, and it'll be great to hear more about the process. We are launching, as Steve will hear shortly, a series of podcasts from authors talking about the process of publishing. And so, we've really been very interested as an editorial team in what makes a great paper. And so this session will be great that way. And I'm glad we're going to be able to record it and share it, even more widely than we're doing now. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. So the order that I had in mind, and again, just randomly, was Yiting and Carl. Yiting, she is joining in from China, so it's 2 a.m. So I just want to make sure that she's been very, very polite and nice to kind of hang out. But so thank you, Yiting. And then we'll go to Eugenia, Gabriele, and Stefano. Stefano, are you the only one representing that group? Okay. Then we'll go to Dan and Pete. And then I don't know if Brett Hollenbeck will be able to join because he said he would be in Hawaii. So I'm not 100% sure. If not, we will go to Ava. Okay. So with that, Yiting, please take it away. Carl, please chime in as you see fit. But I'm assuming maybe Yiting will kind of take the lead, and Carl, you can join in.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for organizing this. So let me share my screen. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, cool. Yeah, does it work? Great. Okay, yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for having us. It's a great privilege to be selected as a finalist and be included in such a distinguished group of researchers. And we are also very grateful for the opportunity to present our work. So let me briefly introduce the background of the project. As although the paper was published in 2018, the project was initiated in 2012. And at that time, TV was still the largest ad medium, but online advertising was rapidly growing along with the rise of programmatic advertising with micro-targeting capabilities. So in contrast, targeting of TV ads was mostly limited to demographics at TV show level. But more importantly, at the same time, TV was transforming, becoming more interactive and more targetable. And so this is attributed to both improved TV data and enhanced technology that facilitates household level ad delivery. And so the year 2012 actually saw the beginning of addressable TV ads. So cable operator, Cablevision, and the direct broadcast satellite operators, DirecTV and Dish, they all launched addressable capabilities. And so this is a Wall Street Journal article in 2011 discussing how data firms have started using TV viewers' personal data to sell targeted ads. And likewise, this 2014 article talks about that targeted ads can be implemented on TV too. Right, so in this background, we'd like to understand the benefits of micro-targeting of TV ads. So we constructed this unique single source TV data set from different sources. we got TV viewing data from TiVo, which includes households' second-by-second TV viewing information. And this kind of data is really common nowadays, but was sort of unique back then. And we connect the data with show characteristic data from Tribune Media Services and ad schedule data from TNS in order to infer what show content or ad content was viewed for each moment. And further, we connect TV viewing data with purchase data in order to infer ad effects. So in this sense, we were an early adopter of addressable TV data. So from the data, we observed the following. So first of all, people watch a lot of TV, which is consistent with industry reports. And majority of the content was watched live instead of recorded. And importantly, ad avoidance is at the household level instead of brand or show genre level. And this implies that household targeting can be very promising in TV advertising. So that the primary goal of this work is to improve targeting in TV ads. The status quo was to target by demographics through shows, and the majority of the slots were purchased in advance in the upfront market. And potentially with the new technology, targeting could be done at household level, and slots could be purchased in advance or in real time, just as online advertising. And while working towards the goals, we can also achieve something like intermediate, such as characterizing TV viewing behavior using a structural model and using this to predict ad exposure. In addition, we explore ad effects by linking ad exposure to purchase. So this is an overview of the model. So we assume people get flow utility from watching TV shows and ads. And we developed the model to characterize show viewing and the recording decisions, as well as ad viewing decision. And combining purchase data with ad viewing data, we can infer ad effectiveness. And all of those models combined allow us to consider targeting experiments. Okay, so here are the highlights of the results. So recall the primary goal of this paper is to improve targeting using household level viewing and purchase data. So we designed 4 targeting strategies that leverage household level viewing information. And we find that micro-targeting strategies can lower ad cost and raise incremental revenue. And 2 intermediate goals were achieved along the way. First, we developed a structural TV viewing model that reviews a few interesting findings regarding how people watch TV shows and ads. And second, our estimated ad effects are consistent with prior studies. So now please allow me to talk about the contribution of the work. I'll first talk about contribution to practice, then discuss contribution to academic research. So as more and more people cut the cord and watch connected TV like Roku and Apple TV, connected TV ads have grown rapidly. The connected TV ad is a type of TV ad that is delivered to streaming devices. So they afford higher targeting capabilities. And our targeting approach works equally well in this context. And more importantly, our paper is reported to have impacted how connected TV ads have been bought and sold in the past, and to play a role in industry guideline in the future. And to confirm the contribution to practice, we interviewed 3 executives in the ad industry. First, Scott McDonald, who's the president of ARF, indicated that media outlets were slow to adopt programmatic ad targeting at the time of the paper development because of their reluctance to transition from the very lucrative approach of advanced buy in TV. So that our paper serves as an early test of the viability of targeted TV and a key data point that is relevant to changes in the industry. Okay, second, John Watts, who's the CEO and the managing director of Coalition for Innovative Media Measurement, stated that addressable campaigns by household are basically avant-garde and priority measurement industry topic. He's currently forming a blue ribbon industry committee on media measurement in addressable TV. And he indicated that he doesn't really know of any other scientific studies on this addressable TV measurement, and that the paper should influence how the committee develops standards and best practices around addressable TV. Third, JP Balsham, who's the former senior VP of ad measurement at RI, noted that combining individual level exposure and purchase data changed the way IRI conducted ad measurement and led to the development of the single largest ad measurement product by revenue in the company's history, and permanently changed the way media buying is done from advanced buy to near immediate buy. And he said, and we quote, that the paper understands intuitively that adding purchase data combined with viewing cost linked to a device at scale creates the opportunity to optimize in real time. Okay, and for contribution to academic research, we have noticed several dimensions upon which the literature was advanced by our general ideas. First, because of data collection, to our knowledge, the paper is multiple years in advance in terms of its use of connected TV measurement and single source data, so that citations are beginning to accelerate. And as noted by the 3 industry people we contacted, industry interest in this topic is also growing as the ad buy model shifts, so that data will become more available as it goes by, and we expect more research in this area. And second, media consumption, such as streaming music, podcast, streaming TV, is growing exponentially. And to our knowledge, we are the first to adopt the continuous time model of media consumption in marketing. And this model is well aligned to capturing the streaming behavior in those growing industries. So our model on media consumption has been recognized by recent work. And finally, our paper has also been well recognized for its contribution in targeted advertising. Here are a few examples of its citation in this regard. So to summarize, since we started this project 10 years ago, TV ad landscape has drastically changed, and programmatic real-time ad buy is becoming more prevalent along with the growth of connected TV. And we are truly privileged to have provided evidence supporting this change. And we are thrilled to see how the field of research continues to evolve with exciting work. Yeah. So that's all I have. Thank you so much. And I don't know if Carl has anything to add.
How can I improve upon that, Yiting? That was fantastic. Thank you.
Great. No, thank you, Yiting. I thought Carl was going to add that he is Sunil's best student, but that's okay. Didn't add that, but he surely is. Carl and I usually have always a little bit back and forth as to who is the best student that our advisor had. Great. So, all right, questions, anything for Yiting before we kind of move on to Stefano? Would be great if here other people have questions around it. Yiting, would be great to hear. I mean,
okay, cool.
You know, as you started this journey, of course, again, it's always very hard to anticipate, you know, a paper becoming so well received and so on. You know, how was that journey like? Which is, were you, as you started working on it, obviously it took a little bit of time, you know, working with Carl, always a privilege. So how was the journey like? You know, were you sure that as you were finishing it up, it will have big impact? Did it kind of roll out over time? Any thoughts, anything like for other people who are more junior, working on papers, anything that you can point towards would be helpful.
Yeah, to be honest, I could not really predict like the citation really grow after the paper was published. I don't know if Carl predicted anything, but I couldn't, and I was really surprised and excited to see the citations. But on the other hand, it was not really thinking back, it wasn't really that difficult to predict because it was one of the earlier paper in this area. And so although it has a few like limitations, I think the fact of being like one of the earlier work in the area helps a lot. That's what I thought. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Wonderful.
Yeah.
All right,
Thanks.
others, just before we move on, if somebody wants to add anything. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Yuting and
Thank
Carl.
you.
Thank you. Stefano, please.
Okay, give me a second to share my screen. Yeah. You can see it? Great. Okay, so let me start by acknowledging my two co-authors, Eugenia and Gabriele. And unfortunately, they could not be here because of, conflicted with the flights and travel by car. So it was really a bit unlucky with the timing. But I'm here and I'm delighted to be able to tell you a little bit about this project and how it came about. And first, I'd like to start by thanking JMR and Raghu and team for putting this together. It's really nice to have an opportunity to be in a session with a lot of people I really admire, and also the opportunity to tell you a little bit about how this project happened. What I thought of doing is almost like the opposite of Yuting. So tell you 5 minutes summarizing the paper and then tell you later a little bit how we got there and what happened. So with that in mind, just to give the topic of automation into perspective, automation is something that social scientists and societal kind of commentators have talked about and worried about for a very long time. The implication of automation for the well-being of workers and society overall. Clearly, people having different points of view, people underlying the importance of automation for economic growth and quality of life. Others instead worrying about perhaps the impact this would have on the opportunities for labor. For example, Karl Marx wrote a lot about potential exploitation, and other people were concerned. Others were basically concerned with the general trends and urbanization that happen around the Industrial Revolution. This is a picture of the skyline of Manchester in the early 1800s. As you can see, the sky full of chimneys and industrial activity. And this concern with the impact of automation on workers and society has continued, obviously, and I would say that probably we are through one of the peaks of that period, although this has been going on for some time. We've had a new wave of automation over the past decade or more, where more and more activities within manufacturing plants and service operations were able to be now performed entirely, if not or partly, by machines. And here you see a auto assembly line. You don't see a lot of people in there, but you see a lot of robots. So clearly, this idea of what deployment of automation does through the opportunities for work is something that you see a lot of people thinking about. And in the last few years, there's been, to some extent, even a certain level of hysteria around that. Clearly, that's, I don't think, seems to be a concern, given that right now, for example, in the US, it's, for many companies, impossible to find workers. But there's a lot being written about automation, but always from the point of view of production activities. And our paper was the first to flip that around and look at the role of automation in consumption. Not to mean that there had been no potentially relevant work, but I think this was possibly the first paper that really squarely centered attention on the notion of automation in consumption. And automation in consumption is obviously everywhere. If you think about, in a way, you could say that automation defines technological progress. being able to do more and more without time, being able to do difficult things easily. This is what essentially makes progress, and this is what automation does. So it's not surprising that a lot of investments that companies make in new products and innovation falls into the bucket of somehow automating or simplifying some tasks for consumers. This could be individual product features, like, for example, some features on a camera or in a car. Increasingly could be central features of a particular product. You could imagine an automatic lawnmower, vacuum cleaner. It's all about that. You can imagine also many software solutions being all about automating particular tasks and so forth. So the role they play in the value offering could be different, obviously, and also the type of activities could be very different. Sometimes you could see things that are really more like a chore, imagine the lawn mowing. Other things are more like part of an important hobby for people, imagine taking photos. And we thought it was interesting to think about this notion of automation as more and more, the deployment of algorithms and other automatic tools like Internet of Things and robotics in society would create more and more opportunities for consumers to see these tasks being automated, at least to be faced with the opportunity to buy products that have these automatic features. And I'm just going to summarize shortly the arguments of the paper. I'm not going to show you any data, but essentially the argument we make is very simple. And this is a chain of arguments, essentially. We say that people, there are certain tasks that they value the opportunity of carrying out. And they do so not just because they're enjoyable, they may or may not, but the key thing that we focus here on is that they enjoy the opportunity to do them because this is who they are. This is part of the constellation of behaviors that define them as a person. And so imagine, if a lot of Italian people like really cooking, maybe making coffee or cooking, this is an important part of someone's identity, then perhaps there might be some thoughts that emerge from a product that may be now automating some of these tasks. So if a task is part of that constellation of identity defining activities, and automating those tasks may lead to lower preferences or reactants. That's basically the basic effect that we study in the paper. And the process that we examine to explain that effect is that, by automating that task, what you're doing now is that you're preventing the consumer from being able to claim that it was them who did it. Now we have an outcome. You bake the bread, went from A to B, whatever it is, the context of the automation, but now the outcome, that cooking, for example, could not be attributed to your own skills and effort. And that is challenging for people who are at least partaking their identity in that domain. The idea is very simple. It's one of those papers that basically says something that, I never heard anyone, when I talked about this paper, who was surprised by the effect. It's one of those things that if I ask you about it, I think you'll all make the prediction that we find in the data. But it's also a prediction that has never been established. It's a prediction with deep ramifications for the design of products and communication of products and services, and one that I think has maybe less obvious elements to it. So I'm not going to talk about those. In the paper we talk about a lot of things. What I want to say is that as part of this project, we ran lots and lots of studies, as you may imagine. I actually don't know how many we ran. I think dozens of studies. The paper features, I believe, only 5. I think the reviewers probably, but there are a bunch of them also in the general discussion, web appendix or whatever. I think probably the reviews at some point or others, they probably saw about 20 different studies. I don't know. So this is one of those things that it took some time, but this is a very robust effect. So I don't say that every study we ran worked, because obviously there are things that we tried that didn't work. But this is one of those projects where the effect is so strong and easy to find that it makes it quite easy to take on tasks like adding a lot of studies when a reviewer asks you for it. So this is all I want to say about the project. What I want to say now, actually move on more, stepping back and looking a little bit about at the processes, the challenges, and what happened next. Like I already anticipated, this is one of those papers where the basic idea is pretty obvious. And that has been, in a way, a challenge with the project. I don't think it was a massive challenge, meaning that there were some people sometimes pushing back and say, yeah, this is uninteresting, it's obvious. But for the most part, people recognized that there was such a developing area that actually researching this topic was important. And we had a supportive review team. I'm very grateful to Rajdeep Grewal and to Jim Batman, who was EAE, for shepherding this paper through the process. I think it was one of those, it was not easy, but it was one fairly linear. We went through and went in, and that was it. So it wasn't anything too dramatic. Here, all I want to say is a small defense of what I call main effect papers that carry, simple ideas. And they can be too simple, too obvious, obviously, like everything has a limitation. But I would like to say 2 words in favor of main effects and simple papers. Some of the, especially on the behavioral side, perhaps too many effects are too convoluted, too narrowly defined, too difficult to get, and too marginal in people's lives to be of great importance. This is an effect that I think is relevant to all of us. Every single person will have a situation where automation is somewhat challenging one's identity. It is an effect that perhaps is not very easy to isolate in terms of the process. We have one process with good evidence, but I think you could argue that this is one of those multiply determined effects. You can probably come up with 5, 6 different things that can happen, which will lead to this outcome. And I think that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It means that probably will happen a lot. And so I think we should study more of these things. As long as you identify something novel in an area that people care about, then, the fact that this simple idea is only a good thing, I think. Okay, in terms of how the paper came about, Eugenia was a PhD student at Erasmus University, where I was a professor at the time. And at Erasmus, there is this very nice system where PhD students are expected to have 2 advisors. And typically the way that works is that you have a more junior advisor and a more senior advisor. And that's how Gabriele and I decided to take on a student together. And we liked working together. We never done anything, so there is an opportunity. We hired Eugenia. It was a great decision. Eugenia is a lovely person and a wonderful person to work with. She's now an assistant professor at Tulane University. We're very proud of her. And but at the start, we talked about doing something. She was interested in privacy, and we had, I think, some neat ideas. We tried a lot of things. I think she started in the first year on 14 experiments, and nothing worked. Nothing. Really, we tried everything and nothing worked. And that's, for a person who's just starting out in the field and as a PhD student, it's a bit depressing. Actually, a lot depressing. That speaks to also Eugenia's positive personality and resilient spirit, that she never let this, pull her down. But clearly, it wasn't an easy period. And so we were thinking, Gabriele and I, about what can we do to help her, because now we need to. She needed to feel some progress in some project. Otherwise, I think the risk was that if you keep just thinking lower and lower, it would be, very depressing as an early career PhD student. And I had this notion of studying this idea of resistance to automation, identity-based behavior already for a year or 2. And when we were having these discussions was close to the time when I was promoted to full professor. And in Holland, full professor means that you give a big speech, and they write it in a book, and everybody shows up with a gown and the dean and whatever. It's kind of like one of those sort of like big wah-wahs. And so I did it like most people about what I had done in the previous 10 years. And then I felt a little kind of running out of steam a bit. I was kind of bored. And I was thinking, what should I do now? Can I do more of the same? Should I do something else? Become dean, become a consultant, whatever? I don't know. What should I do to energize myself? Because up to that point, you have this extrinsic incentives. You want to get promoted, you want to get tenure, then you want to get full. And so you have also this outside, forces that motivate you. But then at this point, I felt a little bit like, okay, what should I do now? And I basically was reading in my personal time about machine learning and what was happening in AI. I have a background in statistics, and I was just stunned by how these neural networks were all of a sudden starting to deliver things that many people thought maybe they would deliver, but nobody had been able to do. And, the combination of data and computational power. And so I just was reading about it. Then I thought, okay, well, this has big implications for our students. I was academic director of a big program. So I was worrying about what this means for our curriculum, for the courses. Then I started thinking about my own kids and say, oh, wow, this is going to impact a lot of things in society. And so, I thought, nobody's studying this in marketing or psychology for really. And it's a big topic. It's going to get even bigger. And why don't I just jump and start doing this? And so I'd done no research on essentially automation or technology generally up to that point. But I decided that this is what I wanted to basically direct my career. So I pitched them this idea. And my idea was initially to do a paper on AI. And then when we discussed the idea, this was back in 2014, the feedback I was getting was, this is too futuristic, it's too out there. It kind of feels sci-fi thing. People won't think it's real. It's too narrow. Don't do it. And then I thought, okay, maybe it's too ahead of the curve. So let me do something more on automation. Then it applies also to, cars and washing machines and whatever. It's much broader. And but of course, you can think later, thinking, okay, the review process took care of that issue in the sense that by the time the paper came out in 2018, everybody was only talking about AI. And so I then wished, we should have stuck to that because I think we would have gotten even more attention. But I'm happy it is about automation because I think it does speak to a very broad range of phenomena, including a lot of AI applications, obviously. Okay, let me just conclude. I think what happens next has been fun to see. It's been an explosion of interest on automation-related topics. You can think about all the papers you see now on chatbots, on algorithms and algorithm aversion or appreciation, on reaction to robots and all kinds of stuff like that, in service context, in production context, and so on. So I would say that now is one of the major areas of consumer research. It certainly wasn't back 5 years ago. And so if you looked at the program of a conference like ACR over the past maybe decade, you've seen every year more and more sessions being about this kind of stuff. And so I think this is one reason for the success of this paper was simply good timing, that, a lot of people were interested in the topics and cited it because, it was simply, something that they were thinking a lot about. And what's interesting here, I think, is that there's still many, many different questions that can be asked. I'm especially interested now in the topic of generative AI. And I think, relational AI and other topics like that is really, and I think what's interesting to me, maybe this is an insight also for junior researchers, is that if you study a topic that is really exciting and really new, there is often just wide space open for you to make a contribution. And also editors want research like that, meaning on those topics that everybody's thinking about. So I don't say that you get an easier time in the process. Obviously, the bar is high like it always is, but you do get a favorable hearing. I mean, from the editors, when you submit a paper, say 2014, people started talking about AI a lot. We sent a paper about automation. I remember, the editor telling us this is a topic where they wanted to have more stuff on. So I think that definitely must have helped his decision to invite a revision. And so, generally speaking, beyond this particular paper, I've continued working in the area. By now, almost everything that I do is related to AI and automation. I was able to focus now on this topic in a way that I've never been able to do throughout my career. So I think it's been exciting for me. Obviously, a lot of other things happen on the back of this, which is more visibility in the field. I think the research I'm doing is just as good as it used to be, but now people find it more interesting. And, including also my move to Wharton and the ability to sit in an office next to someone like Raghu and Pete. So that is it for me. I just want to conclude with a final thought, and which is a general issue, which I think it might be something to consider broadly. I don't think I've done a lot of research on this, but this thought has come to me many times over the years, which is in this paper, and also some other papers that we've done around related topics on identity, you see, in a way, a little bit of a hollowing out of people's identities through technology, meaning that a lot of things that were meaningful to you are now either changed, simplified, or altogether taken away. And they're less of a signal of who you are, they're less diagnostic of skills because everybody can do them with a touch of a button. And so in a way, you could say that our life, our identity is somewhat being hollowed out or emptied. And obviously there will be other things that we do, and these identities are changing, not disappearing oftentimes, like that of photography, for example. But I think an interesting question remains, which is, if our life is to some extent being emptied by these amazing machines, how are we going to feel it? What is it that we're going to do to feel we are who we are? And an interesting question for marketeers, for companies who develop products and services, and I think more generally, really for all of us. I'm going to stop it here, and if there's any question or comment, I'd love to hear.
Great. Thank you, Stefano. That's wonderful. And this is not a generative AI. This is actually Stefano, just to kind of make sure that, he's doing a lot of work on it, but this is actually him. But great.
How do you know?
Oh, that's true. But, his humor is actually coming through. I don't know whether generative AI can still capture, maybe it can, I don't know. But we have an answer to Stefano's question. The next set of people, Dan and Pete, will talk about how do you fill up the thing that you want to do. You talk about CBCV. So go ahead, Dan and Pete, go right ahead and talk about customer value. Again, unless other people have any questions to Stefano, just want to make sure. Okay, great. Thank you, Stefano.
I'm excited. And yeah, I know Pete's got an upcoming appointment. I don't know if you wanted to kind of kick us off, but yeah, happy to do so. Otherwise, yeah, really
go right to it, Dan.
All right. Well, yeah, very excited to share a bit more about our paper. Obviously, we couldn't be more grateful for just being considered in the set. So yeah, this was just to kind of give the backstory on this. Obviously, I'll give a little bit in the prepared remarks, but this was kind of the follow-up to a paper that we'd written in JM, laying out the framework for how to basically relate customer purchase behavior to valuation in subscription settings. This was kind of the follow-up where we kind of lay all that out in non-subscription settings. And in some sense, it was kind of a windy path. So yeah, kind of it'd be fun kind of amusing on that a little bit. But yeah, I figure we can maybe just get into the deck and then that'll kind of segue us into the broader context. So let me just share my screen over here. So hopefully everyone should be able to see my screen. Okay, good. Yeah, so in general, the really high level context for the work is that marketing has not necessarily gotten the respect that it deserves in the C-suite. And we know that what we're doing is very important, but oftentimes being able to communicate that to the CFO or the CEO can be a challenge. And there's just a number of manifestations of that. There's these statistics about how short CMO tenures are. I just checked it a few months ago. We had the latest numbers for 2022, and it's just a smidge over 3 years. That's the kind of the average tenure of a CMO, and the average tenure of a CEO is something like 3 times as large. I mean, it's some much larger number. The trend has still been kind of moving in the wrong direction. I think the latest figures were the lowest in over a decade. So the figures are low. They're seemingly getting kind of worse. And yeah, I think part of that is because oftentimes it's really hard for the CEO to know exactly what it is that the CMO is doing to create value for the firm. And oftentimes that marketing department as a whole is seen as kind of a center for cost as opposed to something that's driving legitimate value for the company. And so, as I was saying before, we know that we're creating a lot of value, but I think oftentimes there's kind of something that's lost in translation. The things that we care about and we emphasize and we'll say when we're talking about all the good things that we're doing, they don't necessarily resonate very well with the CFO and the CEO. So, what your conversion rate is, how happy people are. These are all important things, but ultimately, what the CEO and the CFO care the most about is the stock price. They want to know, is my company getting more valuable per share? And that's something when we think about return on investment and being able to say that, this project created X amount of value, can we actually make that argument and can we make it credibly? I think, both of those things we've had challenges with in the past. And so I think being able to communicate in the language of what we would call project finance, something that's very common within finance, but this is how much we're going to have to spend on this project, and this is the net present value that we're going to get from the project after we make it. To the extent that we can do that in a very bulletproof way, I think that it's one way that we can be able to establish the value of the actions that marketing is making. And so the way that we do it is through this framework that we call customer-based corporate valuation. And we think the thing that distinguishes it from a lot of other ideas in this area, we're not running a saturated regression where the DV is stock price change or something like that, and you have all these X variables, including some marketing ones. What we want to do is we want to establish almost a basic accounting identity that says, you have revenue that comes in the future, has to come from customers making purchases that have some spend amount associated with them. And so if we had a good model for how many customers we're going to bring in, how many orders they make, how much they spend, and then perhaps secondarily, how much variable profit we get from those orders and how much we spent to acquire the customers in the first place, it's going to help inform a view of what future period by period revenue and then ultimately free cash flow is going to be. And so the beauty of a framework like this is, for one, customer level activity is front and center. This is kind of how we're modeling future revenue, but we're able to take those projections and insert them into a valuation model that if you're at a private equity firm or a hedge fund or you're the CFO, this is the model that you use. We're not forcing them to use some model that's foreign to them. We're just saying, take that revenue line on your spreadsheet and replace it with projections that are coming from these other very interpretable models. So that's really all that we do. As I mentioned before, this was kind of the second paper in the series, and so what really made this one unique is that we wanted to do this for non-subscription settings where it's legitimately harder in a bunch of important ways. For one, obviously I guess I'm looking at Ava over here. We kind of harp on this all the time. We got latent attrition. You've got heterogeneous purchase propensities. When people spend on a purchase, there's a lot of variation across those spends. There's a lot of variation at different times of the year. A lot of that is a lot simpler in a subscription setting where when people churn while they're alive, the payments tend to be steadier. And sometimes by construction, there's only one order that's placed if you want to consider it an order per period. So here, the main building blocks are kind of these four models for revenue. The first one is how many customers are coming in the door every period. And so we'll kind of conceptualize this through this upper triangular matrix where the rows represent the time period, the rows represent the cohorts and the columns represent the time periods. And so basically each of these cells represents the number of customers that are acquired period by period. So if you give me that, then I can kind of fill out the diagonal of this matrix. The second model is how long the customers stay. Now, again, in a non-subscription setting, we don't ever directly observe this. So we infer this through our model and basically how it flows through into things like how many customers are active and how many orders they place. Once we have those models, then we kind of create a second upper triangular matrix that represents the number of orders that were placed by cohort over time. And that's basically taking that first matrix that we show in the top right, incorporating how many orders were placed per customer that's alive, and that basically gets us the total orders. And then finally, if we then incorporate how much is spent on those orders by cohort over time, that gets us to kind of cohort level revenue. And if you just take the column sums of this matrix, that's what gets us total revenue period by period. And so then typically what we'll see in an SEC filing are kind of the column sums, the bottom three over here, kind of every quarter. So just sum up every 3 quarters, every 3 columns worth of activity, and that gets us quarterly revenues. So just a few of the appealing characteristics of the framework. For one, it's valuing the most important marketing asset, which is the value of the customer base. CFO buys it. We've done this now a number of times with publicly traded companies and privately traded companies. The data is readily available. There's many companies that disclose this data regularly in their annual quarterly reports. It's actually implementable in Excel. It's not something that we had emphasized in the JMR paper, but it is something that you can literally do it in a spreadsheet. So that makes it much more accessible to an external audience. And partially for that reason, it's just a highly general transportable framework. So this is something that could be used for hundreds of companies. Obviously, if you're a private company, we have the granular data, makes it even easier. But yeah, even with relatively aggregated data points, we can pull this off. And that was actually the main contribution, or the main intended contribution of the first version of the paper, was that we could do this with aggregated disclosures. And we could show that even if you had a very small set of aggregated disclosures, we could basically do almost just as well as if we had the granular data. But Raj and Peter Danaher, they were the ones who were handling the paper. They kind of pushed back on us saying, look, you're doing this, it's supposed to be a way to value public companies, and you're you're kind of doing this kind of mental thought experiment on data that was coming to us from a private company that had all the granular data. And yes, I think that afforded us a lot of flexibility in terms of being able to manufacture whatever disclosures we wanted to use. But ultimately what they wanted to see, and I think this was ended up being very good for the impact of the paper, was do it on public companies. Yeah, so we kind of hemmed and hawed for a couple of months, and then found the empirical examples that ended up really kind of making the paper, kind of famous. So obviously we have the models that we specify. I'm not going to go through it here. What ended up happening was we found the two companies that we ended up using were basically the first two companies that we had found that actually disclosed this sort of data. So there wasn't any kind of cherry picking of the companies. We found the data, collected it, ran our models, came to the conclusions. And for one of the companies, the conclusion was really that their valuation at the time was fair. We didn't basically we came up with this fair valuation distribution, and the company at the time had been trading at around the middle of that distribution. But for the other company, no matter how we cut it, this was Wayfair, we could not reach for their valuation. So even when we were very kind of optimistic about the future margin assumptions and basically every dimension other than the ones that we were kind of forecasting with our model, they were still in something like the 99.5th percentile of the valuation distribution. And so we were kind of in a feeling a bit torn about that, because we're writing a marketing paper. We don't want to challenge the efficient markets hypothesis here. This is just not the outlet for that. But we couldn't come to any other conclusion. So we posted the paper. This was back in September of 2017, and literally the next day, the stock price for Wayfair started to plummet. It fell more than it had at any one day, and more than, I forget how long it had been, but quite a while. There was no other news. There's a famous short seller that was tweeting about it. And then we started to get phone calls from sell-side analysts, and then Jim Cramer started to talk about it. So it really created quite a to-do. It went all the way up to the CEO of that company. They lost over $1 billion worth of market valuation. And it'd be one thing if they were a $150 billion company, 1 billion here, 1 billion there. But they were, a $7 billion company. So to lose one on seven, that's kind of a big deal. So they were very not pleased about the paper. Again, as I kind of alluded to, there was a whole bunch of media that kind of came out about that paper. Obviously, the one in the bottom right over here is the one about Jim Cramer. He had this whole piece that he had done, and he was talking about us in the piece, and it was kind of surreal actually to be in my little dorm at the time and see him pop up on the video. Just, you can't even imagine as a PhD student having that happen. We subsequently used that model on a number of other, these are all, so basically this paper and the preceding paper have gotten a lot of media attention. These are just a sampling of articles just about the non-subscription papers. This is purely about the JMR work, but we've done this also on Lyft, the ride-hailing company, on Farfetch, the luxury marketplace, Warby Parker. There's just a lot of different non-subscription businesses that we've applied it to, and each time it always seems to resonate. I think everyone intuitively understands that the framework kind of makes sense, and they really buy into the conclusions, which I think is it's kind of a testament to the utility of the framework. I'll kind of skip. There's a whole bunch of people who are saying some nice things about it. This was a senior partner at Bain who was saying how they now have a product that they offer clients that is based on kind of the CBCB framework. But there's also a lot of different investment firms that have used it. So this was just a small sample of the names of some of the firms that have told us that they've used it, that we were allowed to disclose their names. But there's a number of others that we've worked with that we can't name their names, but have also benefited from the framework. As I mentioned with Wayfair, it's impacted valuations a number of times. So it's just something that's had a lot of real world impact. Yeah, so that's kind of the story behind that paper. Kind of continue to do work in the area. There's one aspect of incorporating other data sources. So I thought it might be helpful just to spend a few minutes just talking about kind of where we hope to go from here. But yeah, one is other data sources. So one of the unique features of CBCV is that it can be applied when we have a relatively limited amount of data. We'll have these quarterly aggregated disclosures and we can run the model on those, but oftentimes there's other data that's available. But oftentimes that data has kind of certain other deficiencies to it. So one way that you can kind of conceptualize data is kind of where it's coming from. Is it representative or not? And how granular is it? And so the ideal is that you're in the bottom left quadrant over here, that you have kind of population level representative data, and it's very rich. But oftentimes we don't have that data. So there are some occasions where we do, if you're inside the company, if you're a PE firm and they put it all in the data room, or if you're a vendor of a company like that, then you may be in the bottom left quadrant, but beggars can't be choosers. And sometimes you end up in the two off diagonals. So basically the aggregated disclosures, they're kind of in the bottom right quadrant because they're representative. They represent every customer of the firms, but they're aggregated. Oftentimes we'll have these Nielsen IRI or credit card panel or some other panel. And the great thing about those is they're very granular, but oftentimes they're for a subsample that may not be representative. So this paper was about how we can kind of do that same sort of exercise I just described, but to do it where we have these data sources as opposed to just the bottom right or the bottom left. In terms of where we're going from here, one area that we'd love to explore, I've got a current project on it, is kind of generalizable learnings. The typical paper in this area has 1 or 2 empirical examples, and sample size of 2 leaves you kind of underpowered. So you can't really make statements about things in a generalizable way. We have a credit card panel that gives us data on over 1,000 companies that will allow us to be able to make more powered statements. Using more modern methods, I think one of the very fair knocks is oftentimes the models that we'll specify are simple parametric models. Oftentimes it's appropriate, especially when the data is very limited, which is the case in our paper. But if you have very rich data, then you can specify a richer model. And so the question could be, what if you had the richer data and you wanted to do CBCV? Moving to a more causal framework where we're talking about creating value, that creates a whole host of other issues. We're starting to see some really cool work, including Ava's work, where we're thinking about longer term value. And then CBCV in other settings. So one that we keep running into, just keeps coming up time and again, or CBCV or some other valuation in 2-sided marketplace or 3-sided marketplaces. And there's just a whole bunch of other issues that crop up when you start having to incorporate 2 or even 3 sides. So I think that's a very interesting area that we're just starting to scratch the surface of now. So yes, that's everything that I had. Thanks so much. And I don't know if there are any questions or thoughts that people had, but again, just thanks for being a part of it.
Great. No, thank you, Dan. Thank you, Pete. Questions for Dan or Pete?
And not a question, but a comment, because you were talking about the impact on, of course, a lot of people in the investment community. I think Pete knows, but I don't know if Dan, I actually I teach a new course now at HBS about customer management, and I don't apply the Excel per se, but we discuss a lot about customer-based evaluation. And this is something that the students are asking for more and more and more. So I send them to your LinkedIn and your materials. So anyway, so just to tell you that it's also impacting the future ones. So it's working very well.
I know one of the conflicts can be that Wayfair is a Boston-based company. So if you kind of bring up that,
the students want to know that, they will know that before,
Yeah.
Great. No, I need to now kind of revisit the CEO of my household. Hopefully I can convince her that I'm actually valuable. So I think this is a good way to think about my own value in the household. We'll see. All right, great, Eva. We will move over to you. I don't see Brett here, so I think, you're the one.
Okay, very good. Let me just put this. So what I did is, yeah, I kind of, recover some old slides just to give a very brief idea of the like summary of the paper, and then I'll just a few bullet points, my thoughts, and how the paper has changed later, the ideas I have, the ideas of people. So anyway, so the paper, I believe, is super basic. Back to when Stefano said that this is about a main effect. This is not even a main effect. This is, I think, it's a common sense paper that nobody has shown in this context before with rich empirics. So the basic idea here, it came from, I'll tell you more the personal background at the end, but really the paper presents the idea that before, I mean, it's still in 2000, I don't know, 2010, 2015, most of the literature on customer churn was about prediction. And this comes from actually an exercise that I did before a choice symposium I was actually collecting all of the papers, and I was searching by words of whatever paper that mentions retention, churn, and so on. And I did a lead review, and this is really when I realized that most of them were about prediction. And it wasn't a moment for me to blame the researchers. It was a moment to blame, like, people do predict churn because indeed this is what companies want us to do. So at first I didn't blame researchers, to be honest. I was more in the mindset of blaming companies and blaming them to the sense that, is it really that they should target customers who are at the high risk of churning? And this is how the paper started, thinking really like, yeah, I get it that companies do that, but is it what they should be doing? Because we know from researchers that we should target the people with the highest sensitivity. So the idea, what I wanted to do in the paper was to merge what we knew from understanding beta I, to actually showing whether that's the case. So the paper is in itself very empirical, just testing whether those who happen to have the highest risk of churning, if you intervene, would be those who actually are the most responsive to intervention. At first, I thought the answer was going to be yes, to be honest. I'm totally honest with you, I thought so, but actually didn't turn out to be the way. So the way I go and tested that, I had two different companies who were willing to share experimental data with me. And both of them, what they had in common was we do estimate risk of people, and at the same time, we ran some campaigns that we did some A/B tests. The goal of those campaigns originally was not to figuring out heterogeneity or anything like that, but I got lucky that these companies were willing to actually share this data. So what I took experimental data for was really like, let's try to actually figure out, let's collect as many observations, many behaviors as I can, because with those behaviors, the plan was actually figuring out the answer. The way I went to answer this question back then was really to, now I feel that I totally reinvented the wheel. I was not aware back then of the rich literature on policy evaluation and statistics. So what I did is I reinvented it. I learned a lot from machine learning literature about calibration validation and split the samples. So I took that to our domain, and I said, look, if I do this process, these dotted lines multiple times, I'm going to bootstrap my results, and I'm going to just take half of the data in one time, estimate a risk model and a lift model, and then validate it. Like, this is just details, and validate it with the validation. I'm going to sort customers by risk or by lift, and I'm going to figure out how many of them are actually I'm actually changing their behavior. Honest to the team here, to the group, I really was back then, I was confusing in my mind individual treatment effect with group treatment effect. So I'm going to share actually what I didn't know and what I learned later. So the way I went to the paper was really going back to the basics of what I could do. And I wasn't so keen on so knowledgeable of causal inference back then, but I learned a lot in the process on doing that. And then I realized that it was really a matter of what are really the X's that are going to be helping me understanding the difference between what I can predict you will do and what I can predict you will do if I treat you. So anyway, just I'm rambling here, but I'm kind of confessing, I think, all the things that I didn't know. So essentially what I did in the paper was really like split the data multiple times, 1,000 times, with the first prediction that these two numbers were going to be very close, and then I found out they weren't, which actually was good news for sending the message to actually managers. So at the end of the day, what the paper does, the paper says, look, what if you sort your customers on the basis of lift? Lift, in theory, should always look like this blue line. If I sort you on the basis on your sensitivity to something, and I measure the sensitivity to something, this is tautological. So this blue line is tautological. The red line is not. The red line is really, I'm sorting customers on how risk you, the level of risk you have to actually churn next month. So really the paper is all about how far is the red line from the blue line. And this is actually one of the data sets that I used, was a telecommunication. Embedded in this question, the other way to ask the same question is like, how many people of the top risk people happen to be top lift, which is another way to say the same. And what I found out was very low overlap. A full overlap was something like, looked like going to a 10 very quickly, and it doesn't. It's almost, if you think about correlation wise, this was about kind of almost 0.2 correlation instead of 0.9 or 0.9 that people would expect. So the paper, one thing that I thought made it stronger since the beginning was that I didn't have a data set, I had two. And again, the point of the paper is the blue line, which is estimating sensitivity, should be declining, which is good. So the question is how different is the red line, which is what the company is doing. So this is kind of the overall summary of results, and this is what the paper came out saying. So back then, what the paper concluded, or I concluded in the paper, was really like, hey, we have been wrong for too long. We wrong in the sense, marketers, in the sense of going after these customers who were about to churn next month or next period. As researchers, me included, what I mean here wrong, I meant that we were not focusing on the right things, because customer retention is so important for firms, but predicting is part of it, but it's not really the whole problem. So what I concluded in the paper was like, hey, we need to redirect this focus from risk to lift in the context of retention. And then this came from a paper that I had with Raghu, paper that I published before this one, where we were actually, for the first time, at least in my kind of papers, was just, wait a second, let's look at this heterogeneity in sensitivity that I think the CRM literature had not focused or celebrated back then. So this is what the paper did. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit what happened afterwards and a little bit about the process. So what happened afterwards was very good to me, because what happened is like, I don't remember if it was, so this also coincided with my move to HBS, which of course then there is more bigger megaphone in this, they publish in their kind of whatever internal alumni thing. And what happened afterwards is that big companies just started reaching out. And what I liked about it was that they were reaching out, admitting, saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. And so they were very open to actually, I think, accept what they had been not doing correctly. So it was good. And the other thing that happened is that big and medium and small companies started admitting to me that, hey, actually, it's true, most of our retention efforts are totally futile. And so to be honest, when I write the paper, I knew the extent to which we academics have been focusing on prediction of churn instead of prevention in a way. And I knew anecdotal evidence from companies doing that. But actually what happened afterwards is that it was kind of, I was realizing that actually it was bigger and bigger what I was actually claiming. So just admit it here. So what happened then later as well in academia was that there was a very good shift to put more effort on causal inference. And many people started working on the problem of actually how to estimate these conditional average treatment effect models, which I'll admit in my paper I was using just a package that was there in R. And there has been a lot of increasingly good work, in my view, like many people, bringing case estimation, policy evaluation to marketing problems, which I think has enriched the field quite a bit. So I am not saying I caused that. What I'm saying is that my paper was part of that, and it was good to see that. The other thing that happened is that, and this relates somehow tangentially to Stefano's presentation. So I found myself talking about this project and how I think about it now. And I've been moving, the more I talk or I present in non-academic audiences, the more I realize that, retention is a very, very tiny bit of it. I mean, this message of we should not go after the actual behavior that would happen by default, but we are here to change behavior, is way bigger than retention. So what I've been kind of repackaging, so to speak, this message that is actually landing quite well, is on something that I will attribute to the person who said it, which is Bruce Hardy. We wrote this HBR article like a few years back, and he calls APINAD, which is a prediction is not a decision. And we are not the first people to say that, not at all. But this paper made me reflect a lot on what we talk about machine learning and AI before Gen AI. It was always about prediction, and helping people making better predictions. And if you apply a much better method to predict in a context where the prediction and the decision are not the same, then we're just gonna waste effort on your machine learning efforts and so on. So something that I find myself telling people is like, as marketers, we should stop being more fortune tellers and being doctors only if we want to change behavior. So there's so many contexts where being fortune tellers and knowing what is going to happen is very valuable. I mean, and I think what Dan and Pete presented is a fantastic, if not the best for me, context where being a good fortune teller or prediction of what's going to happen is good. But in many cases, what we want to be is more doctors. So I don't care about whether the patient is going to die or no. I care about whether I can save them. So this is what I find myself like talking to people. In the context of AI, I personally believe that there's been a very focus on letting machines giving us better predictions and better estimations. And people should not forget that we need to keep asking the right questions. And I think the example of targeting people at the high risk of churning was really asking the machinery the wrong question. And we should have been asked, who can I move the needle, not who should I predict, can I predict? So anyway, so that's kind of how I think about it afterwards. How the project started, super basic in a way. I was at Columbia back then, and I was telling the world that I knew a lot about customer retention. I was kind of like pressure to have a topic and to tell people that I was an expert on something. And I thought I was an expert on this. And you said, I know a lot about customer retention, and then companies want you to help them. And I kid you, this is true. And then I realized that all I could do was to predict churn. And so this paper came up with kind of torturing myself a bit and say like, but it's really, I cannot tell them more than predicting churn. And the whole paper started, I'm not gonna put it the bullet point in case, because you never wanted to put it on writing, but the idea is really an idea you have in the shower. And this is an idea I had in the shower, and this is true. And I said, well, it cannot be that is the top of the curve of the churn people who should be targeted. It cannot be that. I wasn't sure which part of the curve was going to be, but this is kind of how I started. So at that point, I decided to actually reach out to companies that I had worked with in the past and said, hey, do you have any experimental data on retention campaigns? Let's do this. At that point, I did most of the things I knew how to do, which was running a logit with a lot of interactions. It's true. And then I realized that logic with interactions was not going to be able to answer the question. I went to a job talk in the operations department at Columbia where Stefan Wager, if you don't know Stefan Wager, he's a professor at Stanford, whose job market paper was a precious piece of work where he applied random forest to causal inference. I think it's fantastic work. And that was a full inspiration for me to go machine learning. So until this project, I had no idea how to use any of these methods. And that was very nice to say, like, I need something non-parametric, something flexible to actually answer my question. So this was kind of a very a change in how I did it. Now, about the publication process, Rebecca, you mentioned that. I'm going to give you my recollection of it. I didn't go back to my email, so this is what I recall. I think it was 3 rounds. I remember it smooth, but of course, humans, we only remember the good things. At least I do. So now what happened was I started with Randy backend, then changed to Rush. I don't know about you, every time you change editors, the uncertainty is huge and I hate it, but I had a very consistent AE, which I'm very grateful for because Fred was very clear since the beginning. I mean, giving you like the 12 pages of everything you need to do, but it was very consistent through the process. So I remember that. Overall, how I remember this paper was super constructive and super curious review process, which made me work a lot, but it was, I actually have there was no moment in which you are like, I cannot take this response letter anymore, which is kind of rare based on my other papers, but it was very good. Now, 2 things that the review process that made me, that I appreciate a lot, was that they pushed me a lot to, I was using this uplift method that I just found from a paper on cybernetics, something, because Stefan Wager didn't have a model ready to use. There was no package back then, GRF didn't exist. So I found this package and I tested it myself, and then it worked on simulation. So I went to the paper and submitted. In the review process, there was 2 reviewers who were very, very curious, and they wanted to know more about how this method worked. So now I ended up having a super, super long appendix, but it was very good because it helped me having a more robust empirical evidence. So I'm very grateful for. And the second one that was actually, I didn't know, to be honest, that what I was doing was really this kind of offline policy evaluation that is now kind of bigger since reinforcement learning is growing. And it pushed me a lot about what exactly you're validating and how. And these 2 things, I think, make the paper stronger, but also made me now working on other new projects that I'm working on with actually even a better methodology. So that is overall the publication process. Actually is, you can actually, Rebecca, put that on the podcast. This is one of the very good ones that is all good about it. So how I feel about it now at the project, I feel super grateful to the team, especially because this was the very first time, and I think last, that I worked alone. This was a solo paper, first time I had one. So I felt super helped throughout. It's not the co-authors, it's actually other people. It's so altruistic that you feel the altruism, so it's so good. So I feel really thankful for that. I learned a lot about myself. I got a lot of discipline. So actually, I would recommend people to have a solo paper. Yes, I know that most people in this call are more senior than just starting, but actually it's something that I actually keep recommending people. Now, I honestly believe I got lucky that this common sense of predicting churn and being obsessed about it had been the practice for so long. Again, it's not rocket science, the idea at all, because it's common sense, but it was, I don't know, I thought it was the right moment, right place in a way. And then I'm, to be honest, a bit surprised, but also grateful to how many companies have admitted it later. I thought it was going to more stay within the confines of researchers, this paper. And I'm being positively surprised that, and now that there's many packages doing these kind of methodologies and so on, like how many companies reach out to say, hey, I read your paper, it's so right. And it's like, we didn't articulate the problem until now, and it's kind of so good. So on that, so good. So my subsequent work has been working on that. Now I'm moving beyond retention. When I do that, I realize that when you don't do zeros and ones for retention, that you have way more noise. So now I've been working on actually how to figure out how to do this in a very more noisy environment. And one of them being the one in which is more when you apply data privacy protocols, you add even more noise. So now I've been kind of like more fascinated recently about the methodology, about how to do these same estimation sensitivity in a more noisy environments, which is actually becoming tougher. So that's kind of where I am. This is all I had for today. And I'm going to stop sharing any comments or whatever. I think I'm run out of time already. So,
No, this is great. I'll first thank you, Eva. Thank you to everybody else as well. I came in as a marketing fortune teller, using your words, predicting that I'll have a good time, which I did. But as a marketing doctor, I've also changed my own behavior, because now I feel that when I heard all the stories, thinking of a problem which has a very clear focus, perhaps not overcomplicating it, as Stefano also mentioned, thinking about problems which perhaps have, are on the quote unquote cutting edge of how perhaps the industry is thinking about things. And as Heating kind of mentioned, when she started the paper with Carl, of course, things were just evolving at that time. So kind of thinking about problems which may have a lasting impact. Clearly, this is the session for, WWO award, which is for 5 years. I think none of us obviously can predict what would happen, but I think working on problems which perhaps we are excited about and we find resonance in the audience, I think that might be a way to go to perhaps create more impactful work. Great. Thank you, everybody. Marilyn, I don't know if you had any other logistics related things that you want me to talk about. But
no, that's it. Just to encourage you all to come to the Green Award session, which will be starting in about 15 minutes. So thank you all for presenting, and I'm just so pleased that you were able to come here and share your work and to talk about these really important papers. So actually, I'm just as a side note, I've been with the AMA for a while. I remember all of your papers. I probably had some hand in them and copy editing or proofreading. And so I just want to say privileged to meet you all and know you all. So that's it. And I will stop recording.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you, everybody.